Hi, I'm Lily Hamson, and I'm an assistant editor at Retirement Daily. Today I'm here with Marcia Mantell, the owner of Mantell Retirement Consulting. Welcome, Marcia.
Hey, Lily, thanks for inviting me on.
So, today I wanted to talk about the Bank of America 2023 Financial Life Benefit Impact Report. Most notably, there was a pretty significant savings discrepancy across genders and generations, starting out with an 87% savings gap across men and women from the baby boomer generation. It went down a little bit for Generation X with only a 53% savings gap, and even lower for millennials with a 23% savings gap. So, Marcia, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Thrilled whenever a big 401k record keeper does a huge analysis of the population. So I just really appreciate that Bank of America, Merrill Lynch did this analysis and put it out there. It's important for all of us to be reminded that saving for retirement in America is super hard for most workers, and mostly we sort of stink at it. So it doesn't even matter your generation. The numbers of people not participating is actually the bigger problem. Boomers saved, the savings gap is bigger between men and women, largely because women didn't have work opportunities. So there's no real surprise there. And most boomer women are married or were married for a vast majority of their adult life. So, we depended on our husbands. That was sort of the role. Very much the Brady Bunch, comparison. Mike worked as this fancy architect and Carol stayed home, but she didn't clean the house because they had Alice. So, boomer women grew up, and that's kind of the formula, if you will. So, no surprise there. The Gen X women, oh, I don't know, they're on that cusp. Like they're leading a lot of the changes that boomer women who did work laid the path, and then the Gen X women got to participate, but it's still very much traditional roles. And then the millennials, what I find most interesting with the millennials, and I have two millennial daughters. So my older one's 32 and my younger daughter's 27. What happened with the millennials is many of them really know how critically important it was to save in their 20s. And so the savings gap for women, so the pay is more equal, not exactly, but getting there, more equal for the millennial women than it was for the previous older generations, but they didn't know to save, or they didn't know to save enough. And the 20s are by far and away, the most critical decade to save for retirement. Except we don't tell them. Nobody tells them. You need that first job at 22 or 23 and get saving right away for retirement that, is 40 years out. So I think we do a stunningly bad job in the industry. Employers, HR, the industry, retirement industry, the financial industry, we just do a stunningly bad job of communicating in very simple terms. Save for retirement and do it now. And then it sets everyone up for failure long term.
As somebody in my early 20s, I didn't hear about the idea of saving for my retirement at a young age until I was doing research for this job as somebody now working in finance. This just hasn't been information that's readily available to me in my age group at all. And I think it could be really interesting to have this conversation when we're applying for our first credit cards, because that's really on the minds of people in their early 20s because retirement just seems so far off. It's almost an intangible idea for us. So that being said, do you think the 23% savings gap between men and women for millennials is reasonable as you'd expect it to be? Or what's your take on those numbers specifically?
It should be smaller. It should be way smaller. There should be no savings gap. Unless you're out on maternity leave, which most millennial women are not certainly not the 20 somethings, as we're having children well into our 30s, there should be no savings gap. There really shouldn't. I find with my own girls, these two girls, they're brilliant young women. They're both scientists. One has a PhD, one is a computer scientist. It's not like they're not smart girls. And when they got their benefits packages, both of them, it's like, ah, mom, look, I don't know what to do with this. And thankfully, I do know what to do with this. But if they didn't have someone who knew, what are these kids supposed to do? And so they don't do. They don't do anything with this. They leave it on the wayside. Or maybe, if we're really lucky, maybe these young women just got somebody told them at least save to the match. So if it's a 3% to 3%, at least they've done something. But I just find it education wise, interest wise, women are not, girls are not so interested in money compared to boys. We see it in middle school, we see it in high school. Girls are just busy doing other stuff, but they'll listen, when told, not say, well, would you like to save, darling, for retirement? No one would save for retirement if they didn't have to. But if you tell them, this is super important, do this, and then when you're ready to talk about it, when you're 40, you'll be sitting on $500,000. Then you're interested. But we don't do that. We do not empower our young people, and especially our young girls. We just don't.
And honestly, eye-opening, because even if it's just 1% of your paycheck, or it's not a lot of money. For people making a minimum wage, that's a couple dollars, but it adds up. If that's every single paycheck for every year that you're working, it seems hard and not a very tangible thing to think of when you're young, but doing future you a favor is vitally important in my opinion.
A few dollars isn't a lot today, but invested over a long time and funded every week or every paycheck, those numbers really add up. And then once you get to this critical mass, is it 10,000 or is it 25,000? It then starts to really balloon as you are investing. But if you don't have that critical mass, say $25,000, you don't see the benefits. But you can't get to 25 unless you started at 20, at age 20. So it's just there's no magic here. It's just basic math. It's just compounding. And the other piece, if you're married, as still the vast majority of people get married, there's only so many dollars that go around in the household. And so the logic would say in any household, one of you earns more than the other. It still is typically the male who earns more, though not always, certainly not in the millennial generation. But whichever one earns more, they sock away more for retirement, meant for us, the two of us. But then the marriage doesn't make it. Well, all of these retirement plans are designed specifically in the law. They are individual plans. So while Dan and I might have intended for this money to be for both of us, at the end of the day, it's Dan's 401k and Marcia's 401k. And sometimes it gets divvied up 50-50. Other times, different assets in a divorce get split differently. Total valuation, different kinds of money. So women don't realize that either. Well, frankly, neither do their husbands, that all of these accounts are truly individual accounts. And Dan can't touch my stuff and I can't touch Dan's stuff. Well intended as it may be that you're planning together doesn't always work. And in fact, it doesn't work for some in the 40% of marriages. So that sets women behind tremendously that they didn't know they needed to be worried about. So that's the kind of thing that's, again, simple to understand when you have a simple picture, but we don't tell anybody until you're in the throes of a divorce or until your spouse dies early. And then you are shoved into or shoved off the cliff of having to learn about money at the worst possible time.
Honestly, unless you have any final comments, that's all the questions that I had for you. And thank you so much for speaking with me today.
You're welcome, Lily. Great to meet you.